Hi everyone, and welcome to the screening, and also welcome to the stage Dan and Ziad, who you'll recognise from just moments ago, looking a bit more cleaned up. So, as you all digest that, let me just introduce myself to begin with. My name's Angelica Jopson. I'm a journalist and producer. I'm also a friend of White Lantern Film and a friend of Dan.
You are indeed.
We've shared a few pints together. Thankfully, we've never shared a kebab.
No, or any of that behaviour. No.
Or any of that behaviour.
Yeah.
So we'll do a brief Q&A, and then we'll open up the questions to the floor and take in any thoughts, comments, and questions from you guys. So let's dive right in. I'm going to start with two snippets of reviews that have come in from the film. The first one says, a distinct blood-tingling insight into the dark side of British binge drinking culture. The second one, a bloody satire on British culture, which cuts deeper than a doner knife. So obviously, a lot of what we're seeing here is a comment on British culture. Is there any redeeming quality in the culture that you explored here?
I thought we were quite light on it, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, I thought we were. Yeah, I don't know. People. I mean, it is at the end of the day, it is a fairly cynical portrayal of that culture. I've just, we've definitely got stuck into it. But there's some very conscious scenes in the film where it was like it's important to show that these people are just people just doing what they do. You know, there are reasons behind the way they behave. They aren't just cardboard cutouts. They aren't just clones that are just created in a factory and then set out onto the streets at night to cause chaos. And the scene with Steve where he's chained up and he says to Salah, "I'm sorry, mate. You know, I'm a dick." Like, we put that in there to try and show, look, there is humanity to these people. They aren't just faceless monsters, because they're not. They're not. They come from places.
Great.
But yeah, as far as I thought, that kind of gave it a sense of redeemability.
I'll put to you a question that was put in the film. Why do you think the relationship between British and drinking is so strong? And not just that, but why do you think that it takes that face that you have shown, which isn't necessarily true of, say, drinking in other countries in Europe, it possibly doesn't get to that point?
Do you want that one?
I don't drink.
Cool. I mean, it feels like there's a pressure on society here. I don't know, maybe a capitalistic pressure. The stresses and strains of our lives, the pace of our lives seems to be spiraling out of control to an extent. And where you have that downward economic pressure and that downward pressure on people's lives, I think that culture starts to become heightened. It starts to intensify. And I think that is maybe one of the reasons why we behave worse than other European countries and have that relationship with alcohol. I don't know, but that seems to me to be the root cause of that. For whatever reason, I think we've just become completely and utterly reliant on this as a coping mechanism for what are incredibly intense material lives, and alcohol and drugs seem to be the go-to vice for that.
So Ziad, let's bring you in here. A first-time director gives you a script. You're going to be putting a few humans through the food processor. What drew you to that script? Why was it something you wanted to do?
I'm not sure as to the extent I can rationalize that process. Sometimes I think, and many actors in the audience might relate to this, sometimes there's just almost a metaphysical connection with a script that you read as an actor, and it happens very rarely to me. And this was definitely one of the most notable examples of that, where I read it, or even just having read the sides, and I just got it. I got what he was trying to do, and I remember not even kind of over agonizing over preparation for the audition for this role, because I just kind of got it. I remember my mum was visiting at the time, and I chose to actually spend some more time with her than actually look at the script, even though it was an audition very early the next morning, because I was quite confident that I understood what he was getting at, and yeah, so that was just a complete kind of resonance with it immediately. So yeah, it was positive, but I don't know if I can rationalize exactly why that is.
Okay. A character in there who's not very rational, always, depending on your take on it, is Salah. Writing him, playing him, I want to ask you individually, what is his state of mind as you wrote him? And how did you interpret his state of mind as you were playing him? Dan, we'll start with you.
Well, it just seemed to me, I mean, people say it's, it's a serial killer movie, and it is, and Ziad did a lot of research into serial killers. But I remember you coming to me at one point, and you were like, I've done all this research into serial killers, and you were like, and this is how they behave, and this is how they think, and I was like, what's he doing all this serial killer business for? Because like, for me, he is a rational, he's a guy thinking fairly rationally, on the most part, and yeah, it's a movie, and he's acting out what is ultimately feelings that we all have towards, injustice and people that misbehave, I think, on the whole, and I think, I'd like to think that the majority of people, and I think from the reviews, people do tend to identify with the character, regardless of the fact that, yeah, he's a butcher and a murderer, but for me, it always felt like there was a humanity behind what he was doing, regardless of how irrational or eccentric or chaotic he becomes. There's still a humanity, there's a justification there, which differentiates it from a Leatherface, a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a Norman Bates. It's a guy who does feel as though he's delivering some sort of street justice. So that always to me meant that he was a human character, a likable character, and not just a beast, a monster. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't know exactly how the audience would actually react to the main character. I remember we were very split on the idea of just like, will people like him? Will they not? Will they be on his side, or will they just think he's a total asshole? But overwhelmingly, the response has been that you do stay on his side, which was a surprise. So I'm not sure if that was a playable intention of my approach to doing that. But as Dan says, one of the key things about this person's story is that obviously Dan wrote it in a way where you could kind of explain, okay, so the first kill was an accident, then he doesn't know what to do, the authorities don't help him, the drunks killed his father, he's put in kind of human psychological motives to kind of lead this person to that, and perhaps that's, credit to Dan, one of the reasons why you kind of feel for his side. As far as I'm concerned as an actor, that's just like, okay, they're my circumstances, and throw myself into that.
Do you know, I remember one of the first shoot days was down in the basement doing the scene between you and Steve, where you're doing with Darren doing the banter routine.
Yeah.
And I remember there was this fantastic moment where it was one of the long takes where Ziad ultimately ends up doing everything on Darren and pouring the thing in his mouth, and he's got the gunk all over his head and everything, and he ends up there. And I remember just everything going quiet, and Darren's just there, just spazzing out against the freezer at the end. And I remember listening to the makeup girls behind me on the monitor just going, we don't know who the good guy is. And I just remember thinking, yeah, we've nailed this. The ambiguity there, it was like, that, if you took that in isolation, just not knowing who to root for in that situation was fantastic.
I think it's also how far the character is justified in what he is doing, and playing him. Where do you think the line is for him? Was there a particular line that you had where there is one scene where you can see his eyes turn, and was that something that you consciously thought, this is the point where he has crossed a line?
You mean cross the line in terms of the killing that he's doing?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and his eyes turn to the kebab, you mean? Yeah.
Well, I think Ange means like, is the point where he's like, what I'm doing is out of control. Like, is there a point, do you feel, for the character where he consciously realises, okay, I need to stop? Where's the stopping? Is that it?
No, rather going into it where he has crossed some moral line that he may have had previous to his circumstances.
At that point, this is one of the most prevalent findings from looking into the psychology of serial killers, is they don't humanize their victims. So I would believe that he feels justified in doing it because he thinks they're animals that just need to be put out of their miserable lives. And Yeah.
And so do you see that as his role as a vigilante? That is his motive, that's where he's coming from?
Yeah, but there's obviously a lot of kind of the family history and this the killing of the father is probably one of the biggest kind of punching motives that drives him, and then kind of just unleashing that rage and frustration on the culture as a whole, which obviously is a mistake as we would judge by our own standards of morality, but for him in his isolated world, that was a justified cause, absolutely.
And picking up on some of the racial slurs that come in through the film,
Yeah,
that is very much
witty,
the world that
creative
he
racial
lives in. The casual racism there. Obviously, something in a post-Brexit world has been an increase in racial slurs or reported racial slurs. Dan, I don't know if you just want to pick up on that, of how the character deals with that in the world, also how you put that into the script. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, that we have come under attack in some reviews, and so you've read some of the stuff where it's like this film's classist. It's an attack on working class people, and again, yeah, of course it's a movie and it is overly dramatic at times, but on the whole, it's just observational. I mean, I spent a couple of nights working in a kebab shop to see it from their perspective. And the inspiration behind the film came from seeing that nightlife from our offices, which were above the clubbing capital of the South Coast, and it's just purely observational. That stuff exists. That's what people do. I wish it wasn't the case, but unfortunately it is. And I don't know, in this post-Brexit kind of fallout, there does seem to be a little bit of an attitude of, oh, let's just pretend this racism thing doesn't exist, or let's not call them all racist. But there is an undercurrent of unpleasantness, I think, in society at the moment, and unfortunately alcohol does lead to that bubbling over.
And how much do you think Salah's cultural background informs his experience in the film?
That's a good question. I like to think that you could put a white guy in a burger van, put him under the same circumstances, and you could still make sense of a film that ran like that. Obviously, towards the end, you do get the monologue about how, and this was definitely Dan's intention, probably even stronger in earlier drafts of the film, where Dan wanted basically a mirror culture to show just how bizarre this was, because from what Salah had come from, the nonsense is accentuated and is even more bizarre and blameworthy. So that, I know that was definitely an intention that Dan had. He'd mentioned that to me. But could the film work as just a white guy in a burger van who had his parents killed by these guys? I mean, that's a typical vigilante kind of theme and narrative, so I think it could work.
Yeah, I think we were quite conscious, and one of the reasons why you were so up for it was just because it could have been anybody. It wasn't his race that defined the character. That was quite a conscious decision. Whilst, we obviously touched on parts of his cultural upbringing, we were very clear from the off that wasn't going to be the defining factor.
Yeah, definitely.
So I have the dubious honour of having lived on a road quite close to where that is set, and a lot of those scenes look quite familiar. How much of it was actual footage that you shot out in the streets?
It's probably about 2/3. It's probably about 2/3 all in all.
Which is real.
Yeah. So that was just me and Chris, the camera, the DOP, whacking a long lens on the camera and going out and basically perching up outside clubs and waiting for shit to go down, like, really.
Did you have to wait long?
No, we had a lot. There's a third of that footage which is us taking the characters and putting them into the same environments in the same way that you saw Ziad in that end montage, where we've taken and put them into places that you've seen throughout the film. There are cast members in those montages where we've got them contrived and got them to do bits and pieces, but yeah, unfortunately a lot of that is just genuine stuff.
Okay, one last question from me before we open it up. Violence and gratuitous violence. Where do you draw the line? There's no line. There's never enough.
No, I'm not I don't like violent movies. I actually don't like. I'm not a horror fan. I don't really like horror movies. And it isn't really a horror movie at the end of the day. We premiered at Dead by Dawn in Edinburgh, And you know, it's a horror festival, massive horror festival. You were sitting in a room full of 250 horror nuts, and they're whooping and hollering during the cutting up scenes and stuff. And and then you can see them going quieter and quieter as the film progresses, and you're like, they're gonna be pissed. But yeah, you know, it's no. I mean, for me, the most horrible elements of the film are just when it's not kicking off. It's that edginess between, you know, is it or is it not going to happen? That for me is, and if you observe that stuff out on the street, I know you went and looked at stuff in Watford and kind of observed that culture. I think for me, what is kind of the worst is just watching something before it's about to kick off. That's when it's at its worst. Not when people are throwing handbags and falling around and looking like idiots. That's, you know, that it's that moment where you can feel the tension and everybody's on edge and everybody's uneasy. That's more violent and horrific than when you see people start throwing drunken haymakers around.
Okay. Let's take some questions from the floor, if I can see you guys. Anyone? The gentleman with the glasses.
Can I ask you a question? But first, can I make a comment as an older member of the audience? Is binge drinking, is that viewed to be more modern? Because years ago I remember guys in the UK going out to get drunk. That's always been around. Is it worse now? You said binge drinking, meaning now, or more recently, the last, I don't know, 10,
Somebody asked this question the other day, and I think that, you know, binge drinking supposedly amongst young people is becoming slightly less fashionable. But I think drinking is always going to be there. I think what you have is polarization in society where, you know, stuff's getting cheaper. You know, maybe maybe kids aren't necessarily going out to clubs and whatnot, but, you know, booze is cheaper, just get it from the shops. I don't think it's going away. I think it is probably a recent phenomenon of the last 20, 30 years. Maybe it started in the late 80s, early 90s, kind of around clubbing culture. But yeah, I mean, when you live in a seaside town where you got it all on your doorstep every day, it doesn't appear to be going anywhere.
Because I get the comments, I live overseas, Brits don't know how to handle booze, whereas continentals will have a glass of wine with their lunch, and that's all they want. They don't want to finish the bottle or two or three and can't go back to work.
I think that's about cultural upbringing, and I think that it's about your relationship with alcohol from an early age, and I think it's about excess. And if you're brought up with a glass of wine on the table from the age of 14, there's no taboo there. But if it's held back from you, or it's something that you're not supposed to do up until the age of 18, there's this kind of taboo, which is like, well, I'll go out and do it, and I'll do it in extremes. And I think that's probably where it stems from culturally.
Sorry, one question. Are you going to become an actor or follow an academic route?
Yeah, ideally both. Like researching, and then in between acting jobs, more research, acting job research. That would be ideal.
Thank goodness.
Kate,
Is that how
eat
you're
it.
funding your research? With acting jobs?
Yes, actually it is. It is. Yeah. An advert bailed me out the other day, and now we've run out again. So,
You wrote a paper on, you did a film about how nasty alcohol was, and then you went and did it.
yes, indeed.
Okay, let's take another one. Gentleman back there. Yep.
I enjoyed the film very much. One of the points is the characters are quite racially ambiguous. There's scenes where he's speaking Turkish and then other scenes he's speaking Arabic.
He's got it. First one.
But like no one picks up on that. But yeah.
Yeah, so I was just wondering if that was intentional.
It was very much intentional, because we had to get out of a really, really sticky hole, actually, which I tried to restrict from talking too much about. But basically, I actually wanted the character to be Kurdish. I actually wanted the character to be a Kurdish guy. I wanted to root the character very much in reality and have him come from Halabja in Iraq, where there was chemical atrocities committed on them by Saddam Hussein's regime, and that was kind of the time frames of why there's a 7-year jump in the film, because it all tied into them arriving in the UK at this point, and there was a little bit more of that in the film when we first wrote it. But the Kurdish community protested about him being Kurdish, because they thought that it was going to be a film that demonised the Kurdish community. So we made a very conscious decision after having had those points raised to us whilst filming by the Kurdish community, who were a little bit volatile about the nature of the film being made. We decided to take it out. We sat down one night and had a long old chat with them, very diplomatically. And we decided that actually it wasn't important where he came from, just like we were saying. We worked out that it was there because it felt right to make him a real guy and come from a real place.
Did you rewrite his background from somewhere that Did you have to rewrite that backstory even though it's not obvious, or did you leave it ambiguous because of the circumstances?
Unfortunately, the timing of this this critical point where we really had to make a choice was just before we started filming the Kurdish lines. Literally,
That whole scene in the hospital was in Kurdish.
Yeah.
And we changed it that week. We were just like, okay, let's just get rid of it.
Yeah.
Let's just do it in English.
So just.
But saying that though, the Turkish stuff, there was always the idea that because he was this intelligent student character, he would speak multiple languages. So there was always the intention to do that and have him speak in Turkish and speak in a little bit of Arabic in places. So that was always there. But yeah, that's kind of ultimately why he's become the ambiguous character that he is in the film.
And in the end as well, there was a worry that if we lumped him as another country like Syria and Lebanese, there might be perhaps a backlash from those respective communities, and that was also one of the reasons why we just thought let's just not name a country here.
Let's take another one. Yeah, in the front.
One thing I really appreciate is there is no religion mentioned in here. You've got your church, which is a desolate building, and that's it. Was that also a conscious decision to remove that and just have it on moral grounds rather than principles dating back from religion?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, completely. I mean, there was maybe one or two references in the very first draft of the script that you read. There was maybe one or two references to religion. I think that.
But nothing to do with what he does, with what he's doing, and that, yeah, definitely, I was totally on board with Dan on that, because I think it is important to see ethnic actors whose story is not motivated by their nationality or their religion. So he's not there doing, I do this for my God.
I like that. We should have done that. That's good.
I'm like thinking, scratch off halal once the murder started.
Do you know what? Actually, a couple of when the Kurds protested, they tried to scratch off the halal sign, didn't they? That was probably, there was a bit of that. But no, yeah, it was very much to stay away from religion. Let's not touch it with a barge pole.
Yeah.
It's not relevant. It's not important. That was it. Yeah.
Okay, I think there was one up front here.
Yeah, but I think it's kind of been answered already. I wanted to know if there was, in the process of writing it, if there was concerns about maybe kind of not regurgitating, but reinforcing stereotypes about supposed Middle Eastern aggression, which we hear so much of in the media and all the rest of it. But I think that's kind of been touched upon.
We were always really conscious about that. We were always really conscious to try and stay away from doing any sort of demonising in that respect. You know, he spends the first 25 minutes of the film just being this bumbling idiot, isn't he? He's just as passive as hell, like he couldn't touch a fly. And it was, you know, and then there's that sensibility with the romantic interest, and maybe there's even that kind of paternal thing with Malik going on. But yeah, no, it was all, I was incredibly conscious because I really wanted to make a film, you know, for a brown guy who could just do his thing and not have to worry about those stigmas. And I think when Ziad was the only person who could do the role, by the way, like we saw 30 odd people for that role, and he was literally the only person who could do it. And then we sat down and had a chat very quickly after he did his audition. And
over a kebab.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, you were just like, I love it because it's just. That doesn't exist.
Yes, this is not about that. And I guess in the reception, whereby people are saying that they do feel on the side of the character, then that also just helps that concern being squashed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just coming back to the religious thing, actually, what's quite interesting is because you're saying that you can't see any references to religion in there whatsoever. Really, is that you kind of you didn't see?
Yeah,
that,
apart from the halal in the church.
So we had a review come out this week, didn't we? I think it was maybe the Express. And it actually said specifically, a Muslim kebab shop owner takes revenge against binge drinking culture. You read that, yeah. And it said a Muslim kebab shop owner. There's no reference to it whatsoever. You've just highlighted that there, and it's in a mainstream paper that it describes the character as a Muslim.
Yeah, that was a bit strange.
I mean, that's nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but that's nuts.
Okay, let's take one more. I think the lady just behind you had a question as well. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, as a filmmaker, what was the hardest part of the process for you?
Yeah, lots of options. Yeah. I don't know. There's been so many challenges. I mean, yeah, I'm not a diplomat, but we ended up having to sit down with this Kurdish community and spend a lot of time, you know, thrashing out what we were doing in that respect. And you know, at one point that got pretty heated, and there was kind of protest outside the set, and we found ourselves running around trying to calm guys down who were getting quite agitated. You know, that was difficult. But I don't know. For coming at it from a creative point of view, I wrote the film when I was quite young, and I'm a few years more senior than when I wrote it now. And yeah, writing is difficult. Writing is really difficult, and I think there's a lot of things I would change in the writing, and I'm finding it really tricky to write my second film, just because I'm aware of how limitless writing is really.
Great. All right. Well, thanks everyone for your questions and your time. I'm sure Dan and Ziad will both be around for a few minutes at least, so do catch them if you didn't get a chance to ask your question. But thanks to both of them
Thank you,
for the
Thank you
film.
very
Thanks for
much.
being here, and thanks for having me about to chat to you guys.
Thanks for coming. Yeah.